Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today let's talk about historical criticism. Historical criticism emerged as a distinct scholarly discipline in the 17th and the 18th century. Historical criticism, also known as historicist criticism, is a method of literary analysis that seeks to understand a text by situating it within its historical, cultural, political, and a social context. It explores the influence of the time period, prevailing ideologies, the author's biography, and societal conditions on the creation and the meaning of literary works. Unlike a purely formalist approaches, which focus solely on the text, historical criticism emphasizes the external conditions that shape literature, thereby unveiling the dynamic interplay between text and the context. Historical criticism emerged as a distinct scholarly discipline in the 18th century, particularly during the Enlightenment. Scholars began applying critical methods to texts, especially the Bible and the classical literature, to understand them in the original historical, cultural, and linguistic context. It gained momentum with figures like Baruch Spinoza and later Friedrich Schleiermacher, laying the foundation for modern literary and biblical studies. This approach aims to illuminate how historical forces are embedded within texts and how literature reflects a response to or critiques the social realities of its age. By examining the conditions under which a work was produced, readers gain a more nuanced understanding of its themes, language, and significance. Origins and historical developments. Early foundations, antiquity to Renaissance. Classical antiquity. The seeds of historical criticism can be traced back to classical philosophers like Aristotle, who in his Poetics analyzed the origins and functions of tragedy within the cultural life of ancient Greece. Aristotle's work laid early groundwork by linking literature to societal values and a collective human experience. Roman contributions. Rhetoricians such as Quintilian contributed by emphasizing the importance of historical knowledge in effective oratory and literary interpretation. Renaissance and humanism. During the Renaissance, the 14th and 17th centuries, renewed interest in classical texts spurred a more systematic study of literature's historical and cultural background. For example, Giorgio Vasari produced the work Lives of the Artists 1550, a pioneering collection of biographies that contextualize the artist's work within their historical milieu, blending art history with cultural criticism. This era marked the gradual institutionalization of history as a discipline and encouraged scholars to examine literature through historical lenses. Enlightenment and 19th century formalization. The Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries emphasized the reason and empirical observation, which encouraged historians and literary critics alike to seek historical causes and effects. The rise of print culture and nationalism further heightened interest in literary heritage and historical identity. In the 19th century, Hippolyte Taine formalized historical criticism by advocating a scientific and deterministic approach. In his work, Taine posited that a literary work could only be understood through three fundamental elements. Race, that is the inherited characteristics of the people; milieu, that is the environment or setting; and a moment, that is the historical period. His deterministic framework influenced later historicist scholars and heralded modern cultural criticism. German scholars such as George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel and John Gottfried Herder advanced the idea that literature is a manifestation of the spirit of the age, that is, Zeitgeist, integrating philosophy and history to understand a cultural evolution. 20th century expansion and a new historicism. The 20th century saw historical criticism evolve alongside a broader intellectual currents, including Marxism, psychoanalysis, and a post-colonial theory. Critics began to consider not just the historical context, but a power dynamics, ideology, and a subaltern prosperity. The emergence of new historicism in the 1980s, championed by scholars like Stephen Greenblatt, revitalized this historical criticism by emphasizing the reciprocal relationship between literature and history. Unlike traditional historicism, which often viewed history as a stable backdrop, new historicism sees history as fragmented and contested, interpreting texts as active participants in cultural power struggles. Meanwhile, cultural materialism in Britain, with theorists such as Raymond Phillips, emphasized the literature's role in ideological formation, blending Marxist insight with a historical context. Now let's talk about the core principles and methodology. Contextual interpretation. Texts cannot be fully understood without recognizing the historical conditions of their production, including political events, social hierarchies, religious beliefs, and cultural practices. Authorial background. The author's life, beliefs, and experiences are crucial to interpreting their work. Biographical criticism often overlaps with historical criticism in exploring how personal and societal circumstances influence literary creation. Historical documentation. Critics utilize historical documents, archival materials, newspapers, letters, and contemporaneous works to reconstruct the intellectual and cultural environment of a literary work. Interdisciplinary approach. Historical criticism intersects with history, sociology, anthropology, philosophy, and even economics to provide a multifaceted understanding of literature. Dynamic history. Modern historical criticism recognizes history not as a fixed or objective reality, but as a narrative shaped by interpretation and power. Now let's analyze the social, political, and cultural context of historical criticism. Historical criticism developed in tandem with a modern historical consciousness, which grew out of shifts in society such as the rise of a nation-state and a nationalism fostered interest in literary traditions as expressions of national identity. The Industrial Revolution and Enlightenment rationalism inspired a critical reflection on progress, social order, and a historical change. Political upheavals like the French Revolution and later world wars prompted scholars to analyze how literature reflects conflict, ideology, and a social transformation. The emergence of post-colonial societies led to the critique of Eurocentric historical narratives and opened historical criticism to marginalized voices and alternative histories. Now let's talk about the importance of historical criticism in a language and literature. Enhance the literary understanding. By contextualizing language, symbols, and their themes historically, critics uncover meaning where it would be inaccessible if the texts were isolated. Bridging past and present. Historical criticism helps readers see how literature dialogues with its era and continues to resonate or clash with contemporary concerns. Unveiling ideology. It reveals how literary works can perpetuate or challenge dominant ideologies, class structures, and cultural assumptions. Informing other disciplines. Its interdisciplinary nature enriches cultural studies, comparative literature, and a critical theory. Now let's talk about the prominent figures and their seminal works concerning historical criticism. First of all, Aristotle, Poetics, analyzed the tragedy's social function and their origins. Then Giorgio Vasari, whose works Lives of the Artists is a biographies linking art and history. Then Hippolyte emphasized the race, milieu, and a moment in a literary works. Then Erich Auerbach, his works Mimesis 1946, explored a representation of reality across epochs. Then Stephen Greenblatt, pioneer of New Historicism, his work Renaissance Self-Fashioning 1980. Raymond Williams, Cultural Materialism, Marxism and Literature 1977. Mikhail Foucault analyzed the power-knowledge relations in history and discourse. Franco Moretti developed a distended reading and a world literature approaches. Now let's analyze historical criticism's relation to other critical theories. First of all, new criticism emphasizes close reading and the autonomy of the text, often neglecting historical context, contrasting with a historical criticism's contextual focus. Next one, new historicism builds on traditional historicism but views history and text as mutually constitutive, emphasizing power dynamics and discourse. Marxist criticism shares interest in historical conditions, particularly class struggle and economic factors influencing literature. Post-colonial criticism extends historical criticism to address imperial histories and voices marginalized by dominant narratives. Structuralism and post-structuralism. These approaches focus more on underlying structures or textual instability rather than direct historical context. Contemporary relevance and application of historical criticism. Historical criticism remains a foundational method in literary and cultural studies, continually adapting to include global perspectives, incorporating histories from non-Western cultures to diversify literary interpretation. Digital humanities, using databases and digital archives to explore historical context more extensively. Intersectionality, analyzing how overlapping identities like race, class, gender affect literary production and reception historically. Public humanities. bringing historical criticism to public discourse, museum curation, and education to contextualize culture.